Good evening, everyone. I am Anjali Patil. I work as a vice associate partner with Third Sector Partners. I welcome you all to the 11th episode of the Leadership Conversations in the Development Sector. The social impact space is full of passionate leaders with innovative outlooks on the world's greatest problems. Our leadership conversations focus on the unique insights offered by these leaders as they share their experiences and move the development sector forward. Our host, GoBarefoot, is an interactive web portal dedicated to the social sector. It brings together individuals, NGOs, not-for-profit organizations, and the CSR arms of organizations with the mandate of creating a one-stop information website for both networking and knowledge sharing. We are supported by Third Sector Partners, India's only executive search firm exclusively for the development sector. We are also supported by Catalyst, an NGO which has been preparing young women for leadership roles to create equality in opportunities and bridge the gender gap. I would like to extend a warm welcome to Mary McGovern, Director Emerita, Women First International Fund. Welcome, Mary.
It's lovely to be here, Anjali. Thank you for having me.
Great. So Mary McGovern is a trained attorney who has worked as a community volunteer for local and international causes. She served as a president of the board of directors of Women First International Fund. During her tenure, she led the board and worked collaboratively with the staff through a transformational change of the organization, including a name change, fundamental program overhaul, and a new organizational governance structure. Ms. McGovern continues to serve on the board of Women First International Fund as a director emerita. Ms. McGovern began her career as an associate at the law firm of David Paul and Waldwell in New York. She served as executive director of the Clean Air Campaign in Atlanta, Georgia, from 2001 to 2003. Since then, she has volunteered as a fundraiser, grant writer, grant reviewer, and evaluator with a variety of non-profit organizations, including Caring Inc., Legal Services of Southern Piedmont, Women's Impact Fund, and Alliance for African Women Initiative. Ms. McGovern has a BCL degree from University College Dublin, an LLM from the University of London, and a Barrister law degree from the Honourable Society of King's Inns, Dublin, Ireland. In conversation with Ms. McGovern is Shital Kakkar Mehra, leadership expert and executive presence coach for CEOs. Shital has trained over 75,000 professionals across Asia and has personally coached over 1,000 CXOs in the past 2 decades. She has conducted workshops for diverse organizations across Asia and has been invited as a speaker by leading B schools and professional associations. She's a best-selling author and her latest best-selling book, Executive Presence, The Poise Formula for Leadership, is India's first research-based formula on the leadership skills. Shital is an active philanthropist and social entrepreneur. I hand over the podium to Shital. Over to you, Shital. Thank you.
Thank you, Anjali. Welcome, Mary. We look forward to hearing your views on leadership. So I'm going to dive into the questions. We have seen during the pandemic how all governments had to work closely with both development sectors as well as corporations, whether it was for vaccination drives or awareness building or using masks. So what can the government learn from the social sector?
Well, thank you for having me, Shital, and to all of the folks at Catalyst and Third Sector Partners. I'm delighted to be here this morning with you all. I would say the pandemic has been a challenge for every sector to meet, and it's an ongoing challenge, and we continue to have to think through how best we can meet the challenges that people in the community are facing. I would say what the government sector can really learn from the third sector is that we, or the not-for-profit sector, we had to be nimble, flexible, and adaptable throughout this whole crisis. And by that, I mean, when I say we had to be nimble, you know, as the non-profit sector, when a crisis like the pandemic occurred, you can't just sit aside and do nothing. But you also can't allow process to get in the way of taking action. That doesn't mean that you throw all the rules out the window, because foundations like Women First International Fund have a fiduciary obligation to our donors and to the governments that oversee us to use our funds prudently. So we understood right from the very beginning of the crisis, the pandemic, that we were going to have to think creatively and act swiftly. And so we were flexible. Our program staff were in constant touch with our grantee partners in the early days of the pandemic to understand what was really happening to them and to their beneficiary communities on the ground. And they faced a variety of challenges. You know, our grantees are based in East Africa and in India. So the situation differed from one country and one region of a country to another. So our staff gathered information. They were in close contact with our grantee partners, and we realized very quickly that they were in crisis. In many of the communities, many of the beneficiaries of the programs that our grantee partners work on are in the informal sector. And with the social distancing restrictions and, you know, as you know yourself in India, the total shutdown that occurred, most people in that sector had their livelihoods terminated abruptly, and they didn't have access to government support. They also, you know, they didn't have food, they didn't have access to hygiene supplies, and there was a tremendous amount of misinformation about COVID going around in those communities. So our grantee partners wanted to step up and really help their local community. And so our program staff worked very closely with our board, and we designed an emergency fund so that we could provide our grantee partners with funds right away to meet those emergency needs. And so we had to kind of put in place some restrictions around what that was going to be and how much money it was going to be. And that wasn't something that we had ever really done before. But you know, our board and our staff were willing to be adaptable and flexible and put a new fund in place. We also realized that, you know, we couldn't have the normal reporting requirements that we would usually have. And so we were willing to put those to one side because we recognized that it was an emergency. So I would say, you know, that adaptability was critical to the success of our organization accomplishing our mission, but for our grantee partners too. And you know, and we continue to be adaptable so that throughout, as 2020 unfolded, we realized that our normal grant cycle, where we make one-year grants in October of every year, that our grantee partners weren't going to be able to do business as usual. And so we provided a bridge grant for 2020 to get our grantees through 2021. So I would say that sort of flexibility was critical, and the nimbleness with which we were able to act was obviously very important to being able to be successful. The other thing that we did, which a lot of organizations around the world has had to do, was to go virtual. You know, so we understood that we had to adapt to the crisis ourselves as an organization, and so we acted very quickly in early March of 2020. And had the staff begin to work full-time from their homes. And as the months unfolded in 2020, we could see that was working well. Staff were more comfortable. We were more comfortable. We're a small organization. We didn't have the resources to really put in place all of the testing and so on that you needed. So we decided as an organization to become a full-time virtual organization, and we worked then to terminate our lease and to put the kinds of policies in place that you need as an organization if you were virtual. So I would say all of those things were critical to our success. And I think that underlying all of that was the fact that we had really spent time building relationships of trust. So we had trust relationships with our donor base. We also had relationships of trust with our grantee partners. And I think there it was critical that we have those relationships already in place so that they could be open and honest with us about the real challenges that they faced. So they weren't afraid to say, we can't do business as usual. We're going to have to do something else, or we need money for food or for hygiene supplies. Our grantees are typically working on economic empowerment programs for the women and girls in their communities. And so meeting basic needs like food and hygiene are typically beyond our purview and that of our grantees. So I would
completely agree.
Yeah,
completely agree with you that yes, the whole planet had to be put on pause, and every country, developed, developing, not developed, had to change, adapt, learn, be flexible. And yes, everyone seems to have coped in their own way. And yes, there is a lot of empathy involved as well in the whole process, which we saw for the first time. So yes, superb, agree with you. So I'm going to speak to you something about leadership, that the development sector has, significantly changed and evolved, and you have been associated with it for a long time. So in the last 3 decades, how has leadership evolved to rise up to this challenge?
Well, you're right, Shital. Things have changed incredibly in the development sector over the last 3 decades or so. I would say particularly in the last decade, many in the development sector have undergone transformational journeys themselves, including Women First International Fund, where we have really started to think differently about how strategically we can create more impact in this sector. Founders, trustees, and staff have indicated a real willingness to think differently about how we work. And with a sort of an increased focus on impact and actually achieving change on the ground. And I think that increased emphasis on creating impact has led to an increase of emphasis on proving the impact. And that means gathering quantitative and qualitative data to demonstrate the proof of what it is that you're accomplishing in the field. I would say that there's also been a feeling and a demand for greater accountability in the sector, both from donors who I think are more sophisticated than ever, and also from the communities that we serve, and from the governmental entities. As you may be aware, across the United States, there have been several scandals in the past decade about where not-for-profit organizations have been found to have misused their funds and paid very high salaries to staff. And so organizations like Women First are acutely aware that we have a fiduciary responsibility to spend our money wisely and to demonstrate the impact of what it is that we're doing. I would also say that there's been an increasing willingness to appreciate that local context matters, and to see and to bring local voices into decision making, so that local voices are not just telling us what the problem is. They're part of designing the solution. And that, I'm proud to say, has always been a feature of Women First work. We've always understood that local women best understand the situations that they face and the challenges, and that they are the ones who have the best solutions. And it's not for an organization like Women First to be telling local women what the true answer is. Our role is to help fund those answers. And I would also say there's a recognition that, at least among funders, I'm seeing a willingness to understand that funding only program work is not enough, and funding work for short periods of time is inadequate. And so that we have to provide multi-year flexible funding so that the grassroots organizations like the ones that Women First funds have a source of stable funding and can really do what they need to do to support their own organizations, so that the organization itself becomes stronger and resilient. And we believe that that's the kind of organization that can do better, that can implement better programs. So I would say in the past, funders sort of saw their role as a conduit of funds from perhaps the global north into the global south. And now I think funders like Women First understand that we can do more. And so we have, as part of our own transformation, we've added capacity building resources to what we do. So we expect that our grantee partners will use some of the monies that we give them to invest in their own organization, whether that's professional development for their staff or hiring consultants to help them with their own strategic planning, or training for staff. But we also provide capacity building programs or peer learning sessions or connections for our grantee partners with each other so that they can learn from each other. So it's sort of a combination of different things that have occurred, but I'm seeing more willingness by the organizations in the global north to provide a leadership role and a greater voice for those organizations that we work with in the global south.
Super. Agree with you on capacity building, but an integral part of capacity building is also talent. So the role of a leader is managing talent, developing talent. So can you share with us in your journey as a leader of an organization in the sector, how you were developing talent, any best practices, any programs that you would recommend for our listeners in the audience who can benefit from that or enroll or participate in?
Well, I guess I would begin by saying, I believe that strong women's organizations are critical to developing women talent in any sector, but especially in the not-for-profit sector, because at least in the communities where Women First funds, it's women's organizations that are that sort of are the source of strength for women and girls in their communities. And unfortunately, they don't receive nearly the amount of funding that they need. That is one of the big reasons why we at Women First decided that we needed to provide funds for capacity building for our grantee partner organizations. They're often small fledgling organizations. We may be their first or their early funder. And so they are still sort of sometimes in a place in their life as an organization where most of their staff may still be just volunteers. They may have very few paid staff. So we recognize that it's important to invest in your own organization. And one of the things that we did at Women First was to develop an organizational assessment tool for our grantee partners to use. We call it the GrowCat. And, and so in the first year of our funding of our grantees, the organization goes through this process where they complete this tool. And it involves lots of internal conversations at the organization. And it's essentially where they're trying to understand their own strengths and weaknesses as an organization. And once they've completed that, then we ask them to develop a capacity building plan that's suitable for their own organization. So they get to choose what it is that they want to work on as an organization over the following 5 years of our partnership with them. And so that differs from one organization to another. And it's really tailored to meet their own needs and the needs of the programs that they have on the ground in their community. So that's one aspect of the work that we do, and I'm really proud that we've moved in that direction. So many funders are still just funding programmatic work, which doesn't leave resources available to to organizations on the ground to develop their own leaders and to pay for leadership development or for strategic planning consultants or marketing and communications consultants, so that their own staff can learn from people like that. The other thing that we do at Women First is that we provide one-on-one mentorship for our grantee partner organizations. And we have a portal that we've created on Slack for our grantees to interact with each other. And over time, we've seen that the interactions on that portal have grown richer as our grantee partners have gotten to know each other better, and they're building that relationship of trust with each other. So we also offer peer learnings or webinars for our grantees. And all of these, the silver lining, I guess, of COVID is that now everybody is online, and so it's easier for people to have access to these kinds of resources. There's a greater variety of those kinds of rich resources available, not just to organizations like those we work with, but to individuals, whether they're in the private sector or the nonprofit sector or the government sector. And as for individuals and programs, individual programs that I can recommend, I guess there is just a plethora of programs out there. I would say to any young woman who is thinking of further training, I would suggest that first of all, you have to identify what your priority is. Are you interested in, is your priority to build your technical and knowledge base, or is it to get hands-on management and leadership skills training? And that should guide your choices in terms of selecting programs. And as I say, there's so many more programs now that are available online. So there's a wider array of choices available to you. The other thing I would say to younger professionals, and this was true for me, I think you need to seek out lots of different professional experiences, because you can grow and learn from all those experiences. I began my career in the private sector working as an attorney for a Wall Street law firm. And, and I spent some time working in the government sector, again, as an attorney. And then I transitioned into the not-for-profit sector as a volunteer, but also as a leader. And I think that all of those experiences that I had in the private sector working as a lawyer stood me in good stead when I was running nonprofit organizations. That attention to detail that I learned, and that can be so invaluable, when you're trying to accomplish anything. I think was important to have the communication skills that I learned, and I would say, for anybody wanting to succeed, whatever sector you're in, I just can't stress enough how important I think communication skills are, both oral and written. I mean, you just can never, you can never get too good at communications. And then I think in COVID, you know, having that ability to communicate has been critical.
Couldn't agree with you more. I agree with you completely that communication skills, articulate crisp communication is critical for success, because it's your ability to articulate a thought. And that's very critical for a leader who's today's influencer, motivator. And you had also mentioned COVID, which of course has been a complete game changer and possibly the biggest event in the last several decades. So leadership will also have to change post-COVID. Today we hear corporations talking about respect, something that was never a part of the, you know, it was all about profits. But today they say respect for the employee, respect for the, you know, for the vendor, respect for the environment. So according to you, in your view, how will leadership change in the post-COVID era?
Well, it's, you know, it's hard to know. And I think we've all learned that we have to be humble in terms of predicting what's next, because the pandemic has proven us wrong over and over again. But I guess I would say, you know, I think that this virtual environment that we find ourselves working in is here to stay. Maybe not in the same format, but in some iteration of it is here. And I think that leaders are going to have to accept that and be willing to work in a virtual environment in some form. And that, I think, will mean that they're going to have to be flexible, especially with high performing employees and staff members who will be in a position to ask for more flexibility in their in the workplace, whether that's more a flexible schedule or more flexible hours, or doing a combination of working in the office and working from home. So I would say flexibility and understanding that the virtual world is here to stay will be part of leadership going forward. I think that also my expectation is that leaders are going to have to switch their focus a bit toward managing project outcomes and toward project goals, rather than you know, sort of that older style of leadership where you manage people in the workplace and you had to see people at their desk. Yeah. And so I think we're learning, we have to really manage, be more focused on what the goals and the outcomes are, and less concerned about how many hours people are working to accomplish that, to do that. I think it will be harder for leaders to manage in this environment. You know, when we were all in the office much of the time, there was all those opportunities for spontaneous conversations, and, you know, and to be in the room with somebody else and to see the body language. So, you know, it was more intuitive in terms of understanding if something was going wrong or if issues were starting to brew. It's much harder to do that, obviously, you know, when you're on a Zoom call. Yeah, it's really, really difficult. And so I think leaders are going to have to be very intentional about staying on top of where their employees are in the workforce, and sort of be more willing to kind of engage more frequently with people, so that they can keep their fingers on the pulse of what's happening. And I think it's going to be harder to develop organizational culture when everybody is working virtually. And, you know, organizational culture is important. It's something that we've really worked on over the past several years at Women First, you know, to really embed the values that we have as an organization in women's leadership and growth for young women and professionally within our organization. And so organizational culture can be hard to develop
on a remote basis.
Yeah, on a remote basis. Yeah,
agree with you completely. Yes, I do believe that micromanaging will become passé. I also feel that we have redefined trust. The way that we are going to measure productivity is going to change. Hybrid is something that we just may have to live with forever. So yes, multiple challenges for leaders to manage and influence remote teams. So we would love to chat with you more, Mary, but time constraints. So we are going to very quickly take a couple of questions. Rashida from Third Sector Partners has a very interesting question. So can we please have the spotlight on Rashida?
Thank you so much, Shital. A very warm hello to you, Mary. My question to you today is that your esteemed organization focuses on feminist funding principles and bases its strategy around it. I would like to ask you, what are some of the key characteristics of the partner organizations that you select and choose to work with? Along with that, especially in India, and also if you can elaborate a little about feminist approach to grant making and the core values around it.
Sure, I'd be happy to. Thank you for that question. Yes, we at Women First focus on grassroots women's organizations who are led by women, founded by women, and who are working in their local communities to advance the economic empowerment of women and girls in their communities. So those are sort of the underlying principles that guide our grant making. So we're looking for smaller organizations. We've taken a deliberate decision to focus on organizations that have budgets of less than $50,000 a year, and many have budgets far less than that. We're often a very early or first funder for our organizations. And because we have built this capacity building model and we have a 6-year partnership with our grantee partners, and because we're providing flexible funding, we're really looking for organizations that are interested in taking an organizational journey with us so that they can benefit from the kinds of capacity support that we're willing to provide, and that they're going to be willing to be open and honest with us and with our other grantee partners within our portfolio, so that they can both learn from the leadership of the other grantee partners in the portfolio, but also be willing to mentor other grantee partners, because that's kind of part of what we're looking for. So as they move through the 6 years of funding that we provide, our expectation is that those grantee partners who are further into funding will be able to mentor the other organizations coming in the earlier stages of funding. So we're expecting to see organization growth and development occur for our grantee partners over the course of the 6 years. And that will lead to stronger programs on the ground. We do ask them to report back to us on their programs, but we also are really looking at their own organizational development. So that's kind of key to what we're doing. It's that kind of openness and willingness to work with us, and where we can all learn from each other.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Thanks, Rashida. We have a question from Mehra from Catalyst. So yes, can we have the spotlight on Mehra, please?
Hi, Mary. So my question is, what qualities are needed among today's leaders, especially for women leaders? And what is your leadership style, and how do you lead others?
Well, that's a really big question. I guess I would say that my own leadership style is to work very collaboratively with others, to try to develop a consensus kind of style of leadership, but understanding that you can't always get everybody to the same place, and so consensus can't stand in the way of getting things done. But I do think that being open and transparent is critical to leadership, trying to bring people along with you, and I think that depends on your ability to be transparent about what you're doing, why you're doing what you're doing, and giving people an understanding of where you're trying to go and how you're going to get there. So Again, I come back to the communications ability. I think it's critical for all leaders, women and men, to have, great communication skills and a sense of empathy and willingness to reach out to people and meet them where they are. Excuse me. We don't all come and start from the same place. So I think that is important, to spend the time that's necessary to understand where people are and to do what you can to bring them along on your journey.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Great question, Megha. So while we would love to chat more, but we have time constraints, and we've really enjoyed hearing your views on leadership. Thank you, Mary. Thank you for joining us, and wishing you a wonderful 2022. Happy, healthy year ahead. And thanks so much.
Oh, thank you for having me, and take care to you and to your whole team.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.